Imagine you've been given a box of tools. The box is well made, the tools inside it are excellent, clearly the work of craftsmen who knew what they were doing. There's a spirit level and a set of chisels and something that looks like a specialised measuring instrument you've never seen before. Each one individually seems useful, but you've got no plans, no drawings, no designs, and no sense of what the tools are collectively for, how they relate to each other, or even what you're supposed to be building. You could pick up the chisel and start chipping at something. Eventually you might produce something useful, but you'd be working blind, and sooner or later the absence of the larger picture would become a practical problem. This is the situation many people find themselves in when they first encounter Stoicism. They read a quote from Marcus Aurelius about focusing on what you can control. They try a morning journaling practice. They use the dichotomy of control on a difficult situation at work. The individual tools are useful, but Stoicism is not a collection of isolated tools. It's a complete, unified philosophical system with architecture, internal logic, and parts that depend on each other in ways that matter enormously for how each individual element works. This episode is the architectural overview. Before we go deep into the individual principles and practices, which we'll continue to do across future episodes, I want to show you the whole building, what it's made of, how the parts connect, and why understanding the structure makes every individual room inside the building more comprehensible. Welcome back to the Stoic Mind Mechanic. My name's Tim Howell. If you've been following the channel so far, we've met the people. Zeno and his shipwreck, Cleanthes with his water buckets, Chrysippus and his 700 books, the journey from Athens to Rome, Seneca's complicated brilliance and Epictetus's uncompromising clarity, and Marcus Aurelius writing to himself in a military camp at the edge of the world. We now have the biographical foundation. From this episode onwards, we're going to get into the ideas themselves, the core of Stoic philosophy, examined with the same seriousness we brought to the lives of the people who developed it. And we begin not with a single principle, but with the whole system, because the Stoics were insistent, from Zeno through Chrysippus and into the Roman school, that their philosophy was not a menu from which you could pick and choose your favourite items. It was an integrated system in which each part is supported and required by the others. Understanding that integration is the first step of using the tools properly. The Stoics themselves gave us 3 metaphors for the structure of their philosophy. They are preserved in the ancient sources, and they're worth knowing because they do real explanatory work. The first metaphor is an orchard. The fence around the orchard is logic. It protects and defines the boundary. The soil in which everything grows is physics, and the fruit, the thing that the whole enterprise exists to produce, is ethics. The fence without the soil and the fruit is just a fence. The fruit without the fence is unprotected and won't last. Everything depends on everything else. The second metaphor is an egg. The shell is the logic, the outer structure that holds things together and protects what's inside. The white is the physics, the sustaining medium, and the yolk is ethics, the vital centre, the thing that the whole egg exists to nourish and protect. The third, my personal favourite, is a living animal. Logic is the bones and the sinews, the structural framework without which the organism can't stand or move. Physics is the flesh and the organs, the living substance, the working matter. And ethics is the soul, the animating principle, the thing that makes the organism not merely alive, but purposeful. 3 different images making the same claim. Logic, physics, and ethics are not 3 separate subjects that happen to share a curriculum. They are 3 aspects of a single integrated project, and the soul of that project, the reason any of it exists, is ethics. The question of how to live. So I'll go through each of these parts in more detail. Part 1 being the logic. When the Stoics used the word logic, they meant something considerably broader than we do today. Modern logic is primarily the study of formal inference, the rules governing valid argument. Stoic logic included that, but it also included what we might call epistemology, the theory of how we come to know things, how perceptions arise, how impressions are formed, how we move from raw sensory experience to judgment, and crucially, where and how that process can go wrong. For the Stoics, logic was not an academic exercise in a separate department from real life. It was the discipline that equipped a person to think clearly, to recognize the difference between a reliable impression and a misleading one, and to hold their judgments appropriately, neither too loosely, as skeptics did, nor too confidently, as the dogmatists did. It was in essence the science of good judgment. And here is why this really matters practically. Do you remember that earlier Epictetus told us in episode 8, men are disturbed not by things, but by their opinions about things? That claim only has therapeutic force if you have some account of what an opinion actually is, how it's formed, and how it can be examined and corrected. The Stoic logic, particularly Chrysippus's sophisticated theory of impressions and assent, provides exactly that account. The key technical concept is synchetathesis, assent. Between the arrival of an impression and the formation of a judgment, there is a moment of assent, the mind's endorsement of the impression as accurate. The Stoics argue that this moment of assent is crucially within our control. We don't choose our initial impressions, but we choose whether to assent to them, whether to accept them as an accurate representation of reality and then act accordingly. This is the philosophical machinery behind the CBT technique of cognitive restructuring. When a CBT therapist asks a patient to examine the automatic thought that arose in response to a difficult event, to ask whether it's accurate, whether it's catastrophizing, or whether there is an alternative interpretation, they are practicing in a clinical context what the Stoics call the discipline of assent. Logic for the Stoics was not about arguing, it was about thinking well enough to live well. That's why the fence that protects the orchard. Part 2. Physics. Stoic physics sounds at first glance like the least practically relevant part of the system. Ancient theories about the constitution of matter, the nature of fire, the structure of the cosmos. Surely this is the part we can skip on the way to the useful stuff. But I want to push back on that because I think Stoic physics contains one idea that's absolutely foundational to everything else in the system, and without it, several of the most important Stoic ethical teachings are left philosophically groundless. That idea is the logos. The Stoics believe that the universe is not a random collection of matter operating by blind mechanical forces. It's a rational, ordered whole, permeated throughout by a principle of reason and purpose that they called the logos. The word translates literally as reason or word or rational principle. It's both the ordering intelligence of the universe and the active force that sustains and directs the unfolding of events. Now, the Stoics were careful to say that the logos is not a personal god sitting outside the universe making decisions. It's more like what we might today call a natural law of a very deep kind, not merely the regularities of physics, but the rational principle behind the regularities of physics. The reason things are the way they are rather than otherwise. And here's the ethical implication that makes the physics load-bearing. Human beings are uniquely constituted amongst all living things to participate consciously in the logos. We have reason, we can understand, at least partially, the rational order of things. We can align our choices with that order, or we can resist it. And our flourishing, or our eudaimonia, consists precisely in that alignment. As Zeno says, live according to nature. That phrase, live according to nature, is the foundational ethical instructions of the Stoic school, and without the physics, it's empty. What does it mean to live according to nature? It means to live in accordance with the logos, to exercise the rational capacity that's distinctively and fully human, in relationship with the social and natural community to which we belong. Not to live simply or close to the earth in some vague romantic sense, but to live as a rational social being, fully and intentionally. The physics also underpins the Stoic attitude towards fate and acceptance. the teaching that events in the external world unfold according to the rational order of the Logos, and that resistance to what cannot be changed is not merely futile but actively irrational. We'll spend a full episode on fate and free will, but hold on to the thought for now. The acceptance that Stoicism promotes is not resignation. It's a reasoned response to a rational universe. Part 3. Ethics. Ethics is the fruit of the orchard, the soul of the living animal, the yolk of the egg. It's where the system arrives, and it's where we will spend most of the rest of this series. Stoic ethics rests on a foundation we've already met in the biographical episodes, but it's worth stating it freshly and cleanly, in its full form, so that we have a precise formulation to work from. The foundational claim, virtue is the only genuine good, not wealth, not health, not pleasure, not reputation, not long life, and not even survival. These things that are most ethical systems and most human beings treat as obvious goods. The Stoics classified them as preferred indifference. We quite reasonably prefer to have them rather than lack them. All else being equal, health is better than illness and comfort is better than suffering. But here's the radical move. None of these can make you happy in any fundamental sense. None of them constitute eudaimonia, the deep flourishing that the philosophical life exists to cultivate. Why? The argument runs like this. The Logos establishes that what is genuinely good for a human being must be something that is good without qualification, good in all circumstances, good always. External things don't meet that standard. Wealth can be used for good or evil. Health can be enjoyed with wisdom or squandered with folly. And reputation can be deserved or fraudulent. None of these things is good in itself. Their value depends entirely on how they are used, and how they are used depends on the character of the person using them. Virtue, the disposition to use everything well, to judge soundly, to act justly, to face difficulty with courage and manage desire with temperance, that and only that is good without qualification. That is always an advantage. That cannot be turned against you. The practical consequence is the teaching that has most resonance in the modern world, and that we have already met in several forms. The quality of your inner life, your experience of being you, is entirely within your own power. External circumstances set the stage, but they don't write the script. You write it, with the character that you have developed, through the choices that you make with what you've been given. This is the ethics. It grows from the physics, because only in a rational universe does virtue have the cosmic significance the Stoics claim for it. And it's protected and refined by the logic, because only with good judgment can virtue be reliably exercised under pressure. So let me bring all this together, because the integration matters more than the individual parts. When Epictetus says that men are disturbed by their opinions rather than by events, that claim rests on a whole edifice. It requires a theory of how opinions are formed, that is the logic, the discipline of assent. It requires a theory of what reality actually is, such as our opinions can be more or less in accord with it, that is the physics, the logos. And it requires a theory of what a well-functioning human life consists, that is the ethics, the primacy of virtue. Pull out the physics and the ethics becomes arbitrary, just a set of preferences with no deeper grounding. Pull out the logic and you have no tools for actually examining and correcting your impressions. Pull out the ethics and the whole edifice has no purpose. A perfectly maintained fence around an empty plot. This is why the Stoics insisted so strongly on the unity of the system, not from academic tidiness, from the lived recognition that sustainable philosophical practice requires all three. You need to know what reality is like, physics. You need to know how to think clearly about it, logic. And you need to know what to do with it when you find it, ethics. There is a direct modern parallel in the therapeutic tradition this channel keeps returning to, CBT, according to its own theory, because it addresses all three levels simultaneously. The cognitive level, how you think about events, the logic, the behavioural level, how you act in the world, and the ethics, and the underlying model of human well-being, what a healthy mind looks like, the physics. Strip out any one level and the therapy becomes less effective. The Stoics understood this relationship 2,000 years before it appeared in any clinical handbook. So what does this mean for you as someone engaging with this material? Don't skip the parts that seem abstract. When we spend an episode on Stoic cosmology or on the theory of impressions or on the question of fate and determinism, those are not detours. They are load-bearing walls. The rooms you are most interested in, the practices, the exercises and the daily tools, are built on top of those. I want to close with a thought about why the Stoics often use the metaphor of a living creature for their system, rather than a machine or a building or a map. A machine has parts that can be replaced without changing its fundamental nature. A building can be entered through different doors and a map can be read from any point. A living animal is different. Its parts are not interchangeable. Its bones exist for the sake of its soul. Damage one organ and the whole organism is affected. Nourish one part and the vitality flows through everything. The Stoics chose that image because they understood that philosophy, properly practiced, is not modular. You don't take a piece of it off the shelf when needed and return to it when you're done. It inhabits you, or rather you inhabit it, and over time it shapes the person who inhabits it. Logic sharpens your judgment, physics deepens your sense of where you stand in the world, and ethics, the daily work of choosing well, examining yourself honestly and acting with integrity, that is the soul, the animating principle, the thing that makes all the rest of it alive. Your reflection for this episode: of the three disciplines, logic, physics and ethics, which do you most naturally engage with already, and which do you most resist? Because the one you resist is almost certainly the load-bearing wall you've been working around. In our next episode, we begin the deep work on the core principles. We start the one the Stoics themselves always put first, virtue. What it actually means in Stoic terms, which is considerably more demanding and considerably more interesting than its common usage suggests, and why the Stoics made it the centerpiece of everything, and why their radical claim that it's the only genuine good is not intended to promote hardship, but is in fact an act of true liberation. So I hope you'll join me in the upcoming episodes. Please like and subscribe if you've found this series useful so far. It makes a real difference to how the channel grows and who it reaches. In the meantime, keep calm, keep stoic, and I'll see you in the next one.